There are some phone numbers you never forget, no matter how hard you try. This was the number that
Hello?
destroyed my marriage 15 years ago. The woman who stole my husband. And now, she was calling me. It had been 15 years since Robert walked out of my life. 15 long years since our divorce shattered everything I thought I knew about love and marriage. I was sitting on my couch that Tuesday afternoon, half watching some cooking show on TV, when my phone rang. The number that appeared on the screen made my breath catch in my throat. I recognized it instantly, a number I'd tried so hard to forget but never could. Patricia Miller, the woman who destroyed my marriage. The woman whose name I'd cursed 1,000 times in the darkness of sleepless nights. My finger hovered over the screen, trembling. Why would she be calling me after all these years? The phone kept buzzing insistently in my palm. Answer it? Ignore it? Every ring felt like a knife, twisting in old wounds I thought had healed. Finally, I pressed the green button with a shaking hand. Hello? My voice came out cold, sharp. 15 years of buried anger climbed up from my chest, but the voice on the other end wasn't what I expected. It sounded exhausted, heavy with something I couldn't quite name. Margaret, it's Patricia Miller. You remember me, don't you? Remember her? How could I forget the woman who stole my husband? The woman who took away 20 years of marriage? Who shattered my family into pieces? Yes, I remember, I said tersely. What do you want? There was a pause, then a heavy sigh. It's about Robert. Your ex-husband, she said carefully. He's at the end, Margaret. You need to come take care of this. My hand tightened around the phone. What did you say? He's dying? He's at Riverside Care Facility, about 2 hours north of the city. You need to come get him. I almost laughed. The sound that came out of my mouth was bitter, sharp as broken glass. You have got to be kidding me, I spat. You steal my husband 15 years ago, and now that it's inconvenient for you, you want me to clean up your mess? You enjoyed him all this time, and now that he's a burden, you're dumping him on me. My voice was rising, cracking with emotion I thought I'd buried long ago. How dare you call me? Do you have any idea what you put me through? Do you know how you destroyed my life? Silence stretched between us. I was breathing hard, waiting for her to defend herself, to make excuses. But what she said next knocked the air right out of my lungs. I'm sorry, Margaret, but I never had an affair with your husband. I froze. What? I never slept with Robert. I never had any kind of romantic relationship with him at all. You're lying, I hissed. I saw the photos. I saw the text messages. I have proof. Wait, please, she interrupted. Those photos? Robert asked me to take them. The text messages. He wrote them and asked me to send them from my phone. I didn't understand why at the time, but I did it because he seemed desperate. My mind was spinning. Nothing made sense. I'm just the owner of the motel, where he used to stay, Patricia continued quietly. That's all I ever was. Nothing more. The phone nearly slipped from my hand. My heart was pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. Anyway, she said, her voice flat now, he doesn't have much time left. He's at Riverside, room 305. You should come. Click. She hung up. I sat there on my couch for a long time, staring at nothing. The TV was still playing, but I couldn't hear it anymore. All I could hear was the rushing of blood in my ears and the echo of her words. I never had an affair with your husband. Memories flooded back that terrible night 15 years ago, when I found those photos on Robert's phone, the two of them standing close together, smiling. It had felt like a betrayal that cut straight through my heart. I'd confronted Robert the moment he walked through the door. Who is this woman? I demanded, shoving the phone in his face. Are you having an affair? Robert had just stood there, head down, staring at the floor. He wouldn't even look at me. Answer me. Are you cheating on me with this woman? Yes, he'd said quietly. Just that one word. My world had collapsed in that moment. 20 years of marriage, 2 children, a lifetime of memories, all of it crumbling like sand. Are you insane? We've been married for 20 years. Robert, 20 years. How could you do this to us, to our family? I'd beaten my fists against his chest, sobbing, but he just stood there and took it, never raising his hands to defend himself, never looking me in the eye. Why won't you say anything? Apologize. Beg me to forgive you. But Robert never raised his head, never met my eyes. I'm sorry, he'd said finally. Let's get a divorce. Those were the last words he ever spoke to me. And then he was gone. For 15 years, I thought he was living happily with that woman, building a new life while I picked up the broken pieces of mine alone. But now everything I thought I knew was crumbling. I grabbed my car keys and ran out into the rain. I didn't even notice I'd forgotten my umbrella until I was already soaked. My hands were shaking so badly I couldn't get the key in the ignition. Finally, the car started. I punched the address of Riverside Care Facility into my GPS with trembling fingers. 2 hours away. 2 hours to whatever truth was waiting for me there. The rain pounded against my windshield as I drove. The wipers couldn't keep up. I could barely see the road ahead, but I couldn't slow down. I had to know. I had to see him. After all these years, after all this pain, I had to know the truth. The rain had turned into a downpour by the time I pulled into the parking lot of Riverside Care Facility. The building looked weathered and sad, tucked away on a country road surrounded by fields and old oak trees. I sat in the car for a moment, engine off, listening to the rain hammer against the roof. My heart was racing. What was I going to find inside? What condition would Robert be in after all these years? Taking a deep breath, I pushed open the car door and ran through the rain to the entrance. Inside, the harsh fluorescent lights made me blink. Everything smelled like disinfectant, and something else I couldn't quite name. Sadness, maybe. Resignation. A young woman sat at the reception desk, her eyes widening as I approached, dripping water all over the linoleum floor. I'm looking for Robert Parker, I managed between gasps. Room 305. She glanced at her computer. 3rd floor, end of the hall on the right. I didn't wait for the elevator. I took the stairs 2 at a time, my wet shoes squeaking on each step. By the time I reached the 3rd floor, my legs were shaking from exertion or fear. I couldn't tell. The hallway stretched out before me, long and dim. Room 305 was at the very end. As I walked toward it, my footsteps slowed. Suddenly, I wasn't sure I wanted to know what was behind that door. 15 years? 15 years since I'd seen his face. My hand trembled as I reached for the doorknob. I stood there for what felt like an eternity, just breathing, trying to prepare myself for whatever came next. Finally, I pushed the door open. The room was small and sparse. A single window overlooked the gray, rainy afternoon. Near the window sat a wheelchair, and in it, a figure faced away from me, staring out at the storm. I couldn't move, couldn't breathe. That back, those shoulders, they looked so small, so frail. The Robert I remembered had been big and strong, with broad shoulders and a solid build. This person looked like a shadow of that man. Robert! The word came out barely above a whisper. The wheelchair slowly turned, and my heart stopped. It was him. It was definitely Robert's face, but it was like looking at a stranger. His cheeks were sunken, his cheekbones sharp and prominent. His eyes were clouded and unfocused. There was dried saliva at the corner of his mouth. But worst of all was the emptiness in his gaze. His eyes looked right through me, vacant and hollow. Robert, I tried again, stronger this time. It's me. It's Margaret. I moved closer and grabbed his hand. It was so cold, so thin like holding a bundle of twigs. But there was no recognition in his eyes, no spark of memory. Robert, it's me. Your wife. Margaret. He tilted his head, confused. Then slowly, his cracked lips formed words. Who are you? Those 3 words hit me like a physical blow. I felt my knees buckle. It's me, I pleaded. Don't you recognize me? Robert pulled his hand away, his face contorting with fear. He wheeled himself backward, away from me. I don't know you, he said, his voice rising with panic. Please leave me alone. Robert, please. I said I don't know you. Leave me alone. Excuse me? I spun around. A nurse in blue scrubs stood in the doorway, concern written across her face. Are you family? She asked gently. Yes, I choked out. I'm his. I'm his ex-wife. What's wrong with him? Why doesn't he recognize me? The nurse's expression softened with pity. I'm sorry. He has Alzheimer's disease. Advanced stage. He doesn't recognize anyone anymore, not family, not friends. Sometimes not even himself. The word hit me like a freight train. Alzheimer's? Yes. He's been deteriorating rapidly. Right now, most of his memories are gone. He's lost in his own mind. I couldn't breathe. The room was spinning. My legs gave out, and I sank to the floor. Alzheimer's. Dementia. The nurse knelt beside me. Are you all right? Can I get you some water? But I couldn't answer. My mind was reeling, pulled back 15 years to a memory I'd forgotten, or maybe blocked out. If you're finding the story compelling, please hit that subscribe button and give us a thumbs up. Your support helps us share more important stories like this one. Now, let's continue with what happened next. 15 years ago, Robert had gone to the doctor alone. He'd been forgetting things, little things at first. Where he'd put his keys, appointments he'd made, names of people he'd known for years. The doctor had run tests, so many tests, and then came the diagnosis. Mr. Parker, I'm afraid it's Alzheimer's disease, early onset type. Robert had sat frozen in that sterile office, the words not quite registering. What? What do you mean, Alzheimer's? I'm only 48. Unfortunately, early onset Alzheimer's can strike people in their 40s or even younger, the doctor had explained gently. It tends to progress faster than the typical form. But there's treatment, right? Something you can do? The doctor had shaken his head slowly. There's no cure, Mr. Parker. We can slow the progression somewhat, but eventually. He'd trailed off, letting the implication hang in the air. Eventually what? Eventually, you'll lose your memories, your ability to recognize people, to care for yourself. You'll need full-time care. Robert had walked out of that office in a daze. He'd sat in his car in the parking lot for 2 hours, just staring at nothing. The diagnosis letter crumpled in his hand. Alzheimer's. And then he'd thought of me, of our marriage, of our 2 children, Jason and Emily, of the life we'd built together over 20 years. If he got sick, really sick, I would have to take care of him. I would have to watch him deteriorate, watch him forget everything, forget me. I would have to shoulder the burden of his care while he slowly disappeared. And our finances were already strained. His business was struggling. We had debt. If he couldn't work anymore, if medical bills started piling up, Margaret will have to handle everything. He'd whispered to himself, she'll have to watch me become nothing. She'll have to clean up after me, feed me, watch me not even recognize her face. He'd seen it before, families destroyed by the burden of Alzheimer's care, spouses who gave up their entire lives, their health, their happiness to care for someone who didn't even know who they were anymore. I can't do that to her, he'd said aloud, his voice breaking. I can't be that burden. And so he'd made his decision. He would set me free, even if it meant breaking both our hearts. Back in the nursing home room, I was still on my knees, tears streaming down my face. That's why, I whispered. That's why he left. The nurse helped me to my feet. Why don't you come out to the hall with me? Let him calm down. I can explain his condition in more detail. I let her lead me out, but I kept looking back at Robert, still in his wheelchair by the window, confusion and fear written on his face. In the hallway, the nurse, her name tag read Sarah, sat me down in a plastic chair. How long has he been here? I asked. About 6 months. Before that, he was living alone in a house out in the country. A neighbor found him wandering outside in the winter without a coat. That's when social services got involved. Living alone? For how long? We're not sure. At least a few years, based on the condition of the house. My stomach turned. Years. He'd been alone for years, his mind slowly slipping away, with no one to help him. There's something else you should know, Sarah said quietly. It's not just the Alzheimer's. I looked up at her, fear tightening my chest. What else? He has colon cancer. Stage 4. It's spread throughout his body. The world tilted again. Cancer? Yes. It's terminal. The doctors say he has maybe a few months, maybe less. I couldn't speak, couldn't think. Alzheimer's and cancer, both stealing him away piece by piece. I'm sorry, Sarah said softly. I know this must be a terrible shock. A shock. That didn't even begin to cover it. I'd spent 15 years hating him, cursing his name, believing he'd abandoned me for another woman. And all this time, he'd been fighting alone, dying alone. I stood up abruptly. I need to make some calls. I pulled out my phone with shaking hands and dialed my son Jason's number. He answered on the third ring. Mom? What's up? Jason, it's about your father. There was a long pause. What about him? He's dying, honey. He's in a nursing home and he's very sick. Another pause. Then, coldly, so? Jason. Mom, I don't want to hear about him. That man walked out on us 15 years ago. He didn't call on my birthday. Didn't call on Emily's birthday. Didn't call you. He made his choice. But Jason, listen, he never had an affair. He left because... Because what? Because he's a liar and a coward? Mom, you can't seriously believe whatever story he's feeding you now. He's not feeding me anything. He has Alzheimer's. He doesn't even remember me. Good. Then he won't miss us. Jason! I'm sorry, Mom. I have to go. Click. I tried Emily next. My daughter answered while clearly multitasking, her voice distracted. Hey, Mom, what's going on? I'm in the middle of something. Emily, it's important. It's about your dad. Dad? Her voice hardened. What about him? I explained everything, the phone call from Patricia, Robert's condition, the truth about why he'd left. When I finished, there was a long silence. Mom? Emily finally said, her voice tight. Do you remember how much you cried? How you couldn't eat for weeks? How you had to get a second job to support us? Emily, I remember, Mom. I remember finding you crying in the bathroom at 3 in the morning. I remember how you pretended everything was okay when it clearly wasn't. And now you want me to feel sorry for him? He was sick, honey. He was trying to protect us. Protect us. By lying? By making us think he chose someone else over his own family? That's not protection, Mom. That's cruelty. Emily, please. I can't do this right now. I have to go. And she hung up too. I stood in that hallway, phone still pressed to my ear, listening to the dial tone. My children hated their father, and I couldn't even blame them. But I knew something they didn't. I'd seen the fear in Robert's eyes 15 years ago. I'd seen how he'd stood there and let me hit him, never defending himself, never explaining. He'd sacrificed himself to save us from the burden he thought he'd become, and he'd been alone ever since. I walked back into room 305. Robert was still by the window, staring out at the rain. "Robert," I said softly. He didn't turn around. I pulled up a chair and sat beside him. Carefully, gently, I took his hand in mine. This time, he didn't pull away. "You don't know me," I said quietly. "And that's okay. But I'm going to stay anyway." The rain drummed against the window. Robert's hand was cold in mine, but I held on tight. "I'm going to stay," I repeated, more to myself than to him. "No matter what." I moved into Riverside Care Facility the next day. Well, not officially, but I might as well have. The nurses let me set up a cot in Robert's room after I explained I was his ex-wife and wanted to be there for whatever time he had left. "It's unusual," the head nurse told me, "but considering his condition and the fact that he has no other family here, we'll allow it." So I brought a small bag of clothes, some toiletries, and moved into room 305. The first few days were brutal. Robert would wake up in the middle of the night, see me sleeping on the cot, and panic. "Who are you? What are you doing in my room? Get out!" I'd have to call the nurses, and they'd calm him down, explain that I was there to help, that everything was okay. But in the morning, he'd wake up, and the whole cycle would start again. He had no memory of me, no memory of our life together. To him, I was just a strange woman who'd inexplicably moved into his room. But I stayed. Every morning, I'd help him with breakfast. He couldn't feed himself properly anymore, so I'd cut his food into small pieces, guide the fork to his mouth. "Open," I'd say gently, and he'd obey like a child. Sometimes he'd look at me with those cloudy eyes and ask, "Do I know you?" "No," I'd answer honestly, "but that's okay." I couldn't bring myself to say I was his wife, former wife. It seemed to agitate him when I tried to explain our connection, so I stopped trying. One afternoon, about a week after I'd arrived, I was helping Robert eat lunch meatloaf and mashed potatoes. He was chewing slowly, mechanically, when suddenly his eyes focused on something on the tray. A small serving of roasted carrots. "These," he said, pointing with a shaky finger. "The carrots? My wife loves these." His face brightened for just a moment. "When I make pot roast and add carrots, she eats every single one." My breath caught. "Does she?" "Yes. I should save these for her. Can you? Can you take these to my wife?" Tears burned behind my eyes, but I kept my voice steady. "Of course. I'll make sure she gets them. Thank you." He smiled, the first real smile I'd seen since arriving. "She'll be so happy." I took the carrots and set them aside, then excused myself to the bathroom where I could cry in private. He remembered. Somewhere in that deteriorating brain, he remembered that I loved carrots and pot roast. But he didn't remember my face. Didn't know I was sitting right in front of him. That became the pattern of our days. Little flashes of memory would surface like bubbles in deep water, then pop and disappear just as quickly. One evening, I was sitting by his bed, reading a book out loud, something I'd started doing because it seemed to calm him. The book was To Kill a Mockingbird, one of his favorites from years ago. Halfway through a chapter, Robert's hand moved. His fingers wrapped around mine with sudden, surprising strength. I looked up. His eyes were closed, but tears were streaming down his face. Robert, what's wrong? Are you in pain? He didn't answer, just kept crying, silent tears rolling down his weathered cheeks. I set the book aside and took both his hands in mine. It's okay. You're okay. His grip tightened. And then, so quietly I almost missed it, he whispered, I'm sorry. My heart stopped. What did you say? But his eyes remained closed. His breathing had evened out. He'd fallen asleep, or somewhere close to it. Did he know who I was in that moment? Or was he apologizing for something else? Some other regret his confused mind had dredged up. I would never know. The next morning, he didn't remember saying it, didn't remember crying. He looked at me with that same confused, slightly frightened expression he always had. Who are you? He asked. I'm Margaret, I said simply. I'm here to help you. Oh, okay. He accepted this without question, like a child. That afternoon, I started going through his belongings. The nursing home had stored what few possessions he'd had when he arrived in a small locker. I needed to see what was there, needed some connection to the man he'd been. There wasn't much. A worn duffel bag with some threadbare clothes, a toothbrush, a comb with several teeth missing. But at the bottom of the bag, wrapped carefully in an old t-shirt, I found something that made me gasp. A pair of black leather shoes. I lifted them out with shaking hands. They were the shoes I'd given Robert for our 10th anniversary. Expensive Italian leather I'd saved for months to buy them. These are too nice for me to wear, he'd protested when he'd opened the box. You deserve nice things, I'd insisted. You work so hard for this family. Let me spoil you just this once. He'd worn them proudly for years, always keeping them polished to a mirror shine. And here they were, 15 years later. The leather was cracked and worn now, but someone had clearly taken care of them. They'd been polished recently. I could still smell the shoe polish. Next to the shoes was a watch. The watch I'd given him for our 20th anniversary, just months before he'd left. It had stopped working years ago, but the metal band was clean and shiny. He'd been taking care of it, even though it no longer worked. I held the shoes and the watch and wept. All these years, struggling to survive, probably living in poverty, and he'd kept these gifts. He'd treasured them, polished them, carried them with him. I found these in your bag, I told Robert that evening, holding up the shoes. His reaction was immediate and startling. His eyes went wide, and he grabbed the shoes from my hands with surprising strength. Don't touch those, he said sharply, clutching them to his chest. These are from my wife. They're precious. You can't have them. I won't take them, I assured him gently. I promise. He held the shoes close, rocking slightly. My wife gave these to me. Best gift I ever got. I miss her so much. The words pierced straight through my heart. I'm sure she misses you too, I managed to say. You think so? He looked at me with such hope, such vulnerability. I know so. He smiled then, still clutching the shoes. I hope I see her again soon. I had to leave the room. I went out into the hallway and leaned against the wall, sobbing as quietly as I could. The nurses had gotten used to finding me crying in various corners of the facility. They'd stop, pat my shoulder sympathetically, and move on. There was nothing they could say that would help. That night, I started talking to Robert while he slept. It became a ritual. I'd sit in the chair beside his bed, hold his hand, and tell him stories about our life together. Do you remember our wedding day? It poured rain, just like it did the day I came here to find you. You said it was good luck rain on a wedding day. I wore my mother's dress, and you wore that suit you borrowed from your brother. You were so nervous you could barely get through your vows. Robert's chest rose and fell steadily. He didn't respond, but I continued anyway. We went to Niagara Falls for our honeymoon. You'd never seen it before, and you were like a kid, so excited. We took so many pictures. You made me stand in every single touristy spot for photos. I complained, but I loved it. I loved seeing you so happy. My thumb traced circles on the back of his hand. You promised me that day that we'd grow old together, that you'd never let go of my hand. And I let go, Robert. I'm so sorry I let go. Sometimes, in the middle of these one-sided conversations, Robert's hand would twitch. His fingers would tighten around mine just barely, but enough to notice. Was he hearing me somewhere in the fog of his mind? Could some part of him understand? I wanted to believe it, needed to believe it. One night, about 3 weeks into my stay, something extraordinary happened. I'd been telling Robert about the time we took the kids to Disney World. Jason had been 8, Emily 6. We'd saved for 2 years to afford that trip. Emily cried when she met Cinderella. I was saying, a smile in my voice at the memory. And you lifted her up so she could hug the princess. You always made the kids feel so special, Robert. You were such a good father. Suddenly, Robert's eyes opened. Not the cloudy, confused eyes I'd gotten used to. These were clear, focused, looking right at me. Margaret? I froze. The way he said my name, it was like before. Like the old Robert. Yes, I whispered, afraid to move, afraid to break whatever spell had momentarily lifted the fog from his mind. I'm here. I've been waiting for you. Tears filled his eyes. I've been waiting so long. I know. I'm so sorry it took me so long to find you. I'm sorry, he said, his voice breaking. I'm so sorry for everything. I grabbed his face with both hands. Don't apologize. Please don't apologize. I understand now. I understand everything. I love you, he said, clear and certain. I never stopped loving you. Not for one single day. I love you too. I love you so much. I kissed his forehead, his cheeks, tasting the salt of both our tears. I'm tired, Margaret, he whispered. So tired. I know, sweetheart. You can rest. Will you stay? I'm not going anywhere. I promise. His eyes started to drift closed. The clarity was fading from his gaze like the sun setting. Robert, wait. But he was already gone, back into the fog. When his eyes opened again a moment later, they were clouded and confused. Who are you? He asked. Those 3 words shattered me all over again. He'd been back. For just a few precious minutes, I'd had my Robert back. And then he was gone again. I laid my head on the edge of his bed and sobbed. His hand rested on my hair. He didn't know why I was crying, but some instinct made him want to comfort me anyway. Don't cry, he said gently, patting my head like you might pet a dog. It's okay. Don't be sad. But I couldn't stop, couldn't control the grief pouring out of me, because I knew now what I'd been missing all these years. And I knew I'd only really have him in these fleeting moments of clarity that came less and less frequently. The nurse found me like that an hour later, still crying, Robert's hand still resting on my head as he stared out the window at the night sky, humming tunelessly to himself. He had a moment of clarity, didn't he? Sarah asked gently. I could only nod. They happen sometimes, toward the end. The mind clears for just a little while. It's a gift in a way, but it's also cruel. How much longer does he have? I asked, my voice hoarse from crying. Sarah's expression was grave. Days, maybe? A week or 2 at most. The cancer is progressing rapidly now. I looked at Robert, so thin and frail in his bed. My husband, my love. And I made a decision. I want to take him home. Sarah blinked. Home? Not my home. His home. The house where he was living before he came here. Can you tell me where it is? She hesitated. Mrs. Parker, I don't know if that's a good idea. He needs medical care. Please, I interrupted. You said he doesn't have much time. I don't want him to die in this place. I want him to die at home, with his things around him. With me. Sarah studied my face for a long moment, then slowly nodded. I'll get you the address. The address Sarah gave me led to a rural area about an hour outside the city. I'd hired a medical transport service to move Robert, along with a home hospice nurse who would check on him daily. As I followed the ambulance in my car, my hands were sweating on the steering wheel. What would I find at this house? What kind of life had Robert been living all these years? The road became narrower, more isolated. Fields stretched out on either side, dotted with old barns and farmhouses. Finally, the ambulance turned onto a gravel driveway, and I saw the house. My heart sank. It was barely standing. The roof sagged on one side. The paint had peeled away years ago, leaving bare wood exposed to the elements. Several windows were cracked. The porch steps looked like they might collapse if you stepped on them wrong. This was where Robert had lived, where he'd spent years alone, his mind deteriorating, in this falling apart shell of a house. The paramedics carefully carried Robert inside on a stretcher. I followed, my legs weak with dread. When I stepped through the front door, I stopped breathing. The walls! Every single wall was covered with photographs. Photos of us, of our family, our wedding picture, front and center. Photos from our honeymoon, pictures of baby Jason, then baby Emily. Christmas mornings, birthday parties, family vacations. Every inch of wall space was filled with memories of the life we'd shared. I walked slowly through the small living room, touching each photograph with shaking fingers. They'd been carefully preserved, protected in frames or plastic sleeves. Some were dusty, but all had been treated with care. And scattered among the photos were notes, post-it notes, pieces of paper torn from notebooks, the backs of envelopes covered in Robert's handwriting. I pulled one off the wall. Wife's name Margaret Rose Parker. Favorite food pot roast with carrots. Hates thunderstorms, scary movies. Wedding anniversary April 15th. Another note. Son's name Jason Robert Parker. Birthday March 2nd. Daughter's name Emily Grace Parker. Birthday July 28th. He'd been writing everything down, creating external memories to replace the ones his brain could no longer hold. There were dozens of these notes, maybe hundreds, plastered all over the walls. Remember to take medication. Don't forget to eat. Margaret loves you. You love Margaret. Don't go looking for her. You'll only make things worse. Stay away. She's better off without you. Those last few notes were like knives to my heart. Even as his mind failed him, he'd been reminding himself to stay away from me, to protect me from the burden of his illness. I kept walking deeper into the house. The kitchen was small and barely functional. The refrigerator was old, humming loudly. Inside was nearly empty, some expired milk, a few slices of old bread. How had he been eating? How had he been surviving? The bedroom was even more stark. A mattress on the floor with a thin blanket. No bed frame. A single pillow that looked like it had seen better days. But on the wall above the mattress, more photos and more notes. One note, larger than the others, written in big block letters. Robert Parker, you are sick. You have Alzheimer's. You left your family to protect them. Do not try to find them. If you find them, you will hurt them. Stay away. You are doing the right thing. Stay away. I collapsed onto the mattress, reading that note over and over. This was what he'd been telling himself every single day, reinforcing the decision that had torn our family apart. He thought he was protecting us. Right up until the very end, even as his mind crumbled, He thought he was doing the right thing. Mrs. Parker? I turned to see the hospice nurse, Linda, standing in the doorway. We've got Robert settled in the living room. I've set up the hospital bed. Is there anything else you need? I wiped my eyes and stood up. No, thank you. This is. This is fine. Over the next few days, I worked on making the house livable. I called contractors to fix the worst of the damage, the sagging roof, the broken windows. I cleaned every surface, threw out expired food, bought groceries. But I left the walls exactly as they were. Every photograph, every note, I left them all in place. This was Robert's legacy, his fight against the disease that was stealing him away. I wouldn't erase that. Robert himself seemed more peaceful in the house than he'd been at the nursing home. He didn't remember living here, but something about it seemed to comfort him anyway. I set up my own small space in the corner of the living room. A cot, a small dresser for my clothes. I wanted to be close to him every moment. One morning, about a week after we'd moved in, I was helping Robert eat breakfast when he suddenly grabbed my wrist. The drawer, he said urgently. What drawer, Robert? Third drawer. Important. You have to check the third drawer. He was agitated, more focused than I'd seen him in days. Okay, I said soothingly. Which piece of furniture? Which third drawer? But he'd already lost the thread. His eyes clouded over again, and his grip on my wrist loosened. I don't remember, he mumbled. What was I saying? It's okay. Don't worry about it. But I made a mental note. The third drawer. Somewhere in this house, Robert had left something in a third drawer. Something important enough that even his fractured mind was trying to tell me about it. I'd find it, but not yet. For now, I just wanted to be with him. The days passed slowly. Robert's condition worsened. He stopped being able to walk, even with help. He slept more and more. The lucid moments became rarer. But I stayed by his side. I read to him. I played music he used to love. I told him stories about our life together, even though I knew he couldn't understand them anymore. And every night, I held his hand and whispered, I love you. I never stopped loving you, and I never will. One evening, as the sun was setting and golden light was streaming through the windows, Robert opened his eyes and looked at me. Really looked at me. Margaret, he said clearly. My heart jumped. Yes, I'm here. I left you something. In the bedroom. The dresser. Third drawer. His eyes were clear, present, seeing me. What did you leave, Robert? A gift. My last gift to you. He smiled weakly. I tried, Margaret. I tried so hard to take care of you, even when I couldn't be with you. I know. I know you did. I'm sorry I wasn't stronger. You were the strongest man I ever knew, I said, tears streaming down my face. You bore this alone to protect us. That's not weakness, Robert. That's love. His hand squeezed mine with what little strength he had left. I'm so tired, he whispered. Then rest. It's okay to rest now. Will you stay with me? Every second. I'm not leaving you ever again. He smiled. I love you, Margaret Rose Parker. I love you, Robert James Parker. Forever. His eyes drifted closed. And this time, I knew they wouldn't open again with that clarity. This was goodbye. I climbed onto the hospital bed beside him, careful not to jostle the tubes and wires. I laid my head on his chest, listening to his heart beat slower now, more irregular. Thank you, I whispered. Thank you for loving me. Thank you for everything you sacrificed. Thank you for being mine. We stayed like that as the sun set completely and darkness filled the room. I didn't move, didn't leave his side. Sometime around midnight, his breathing changed, became shallower, more labored. I called Linda, and she came quickly, but there was nothing to be done. "It won't be long now," she said gently. "He's not in pain. He's just letting go." I nodded, unable to speak. Linda left us alone. I held Robert's hand and talked to him through the night, telling him it was okay to go, that I would be all right, that I would love him forever. Just as the first light of dawn was breaking through the windows, Robert took a deep breath, then another, then nothing. I waited, counting the seconds, hoping for one more breath. But it never came. "Robert!" I touched his face, still warm, but already starting to feel different. Empty. "Robert, please." But he was gone. I laid my head on his chest and wept. I cried until I had no tears left, until my throat was raw and my eyes were swollen shut. The man I'd loved for more than half my life was gone, and I would never get those 15 years back. Years we could have spent together, if only he'd told me the truth, if only I'd known. But I understood why he didn't. He'd been trying to save me from exactly this, the grief, the burden, the pain. He'd been wrong, so wrong. I would have gladly borne any burden to be with him, would have cherished every moment, even the difficult ones. But I couldn't be angry at him for it. He'd done what he thought was best with a mind that was already starting to fail him. He'd loved me. That was what mattered. And I'd loved him. Still did. Always would. The funeral was small. I'd called Jason and Emily one more time to let them know their father had passed. Jason's response was brief. "Okay. Thanks for letting me know." Then he hung up. Emily at least stayed on the line long enough to say, "I'm sorry, Mom. I know this must be hard for you." But she didn't offer to come to the funeral. Patricia Miller came. She stood at the back of the small chapel, and when it was over, she approached me with red eyes. "He was a good man," she said quietly. "I'm sorry I never understood what he was going through. I should have done more to help him." "You helped him when he needed it," I replied. "That's what matters." She left after that, and I was alone at the cemetery with Robert's casket and a single priest who'd agreed to perform the service. As they lowered the casket into the ground, I placed a single red rose on top. "Goodbye, my love," I whispered. "Wait for me. I'll see you again someday." Then I walked away, leaving Robert in the peaceful cemetery overlooking rolling hills and farmland. It seemed fitting. He'd spent his final years in quiet solitude in the country. Now he'd rest here forever. I returned to the house alone. Our house now, or at least, that's how I'd started thinking of it. The house where Robert had lived out his last years, surrounded by memories of our life together. I sat in the living room for a long time, looking at all the photographs on the walls. Our whole life was here, every important moment carefully preserved. And then I remembered the third drawer. Robert had told me to look in the third drawer of the dresser in the bedroom. He'd said he left me a gift. With trembling legs, I walked into the bedroom. The old dresser stood against one wall, a cheap particle board thing that looked like it might fall apart if you breathed on it too hard. I knelt in front of it and opened the third drawer. Inside was a manila envelope, yellowed with age. On the front, in Robert's handwriting, "For Margaret." My hand shook as I picked it up. It was thick, heavy. Whatever was inside had weight to it. I carried it back to the living room and sat on the couch. For several minutes, I just held it, afraid of what I might find inside. Finally, I opened it. The first thing I pulled out was a letter. Several pages, handwritten on lined notebook paper. Robert's handwriting neater than the notes on the walls, written when his mind was still clearer. I began to read. "My dearest Margaret, if you're reading this, I'm probably gone. Or if I'm still alive, I don't remember who you are anymore. Either way, I wanted you to know the truth. I have Alzheimer's disease, early onset. The doctors told me I would lose my memories, lose my ability to care for myself, eventually lose everything that makes me who I am. When they told me, my first thought was of you, of how you'd have to watch me deteriorate, how you'd have to give up your life to take care of me, how our savings would be drained by medical bills, how you'd become my nurse instead of my wife. I couldn't do that to you, Margaret. I couldn't become that burden. So I left. It was the hardest thing I've ever done. Harder than I can possibly put into words. Leaving you felt like ripping out my own heart. But I did it because I love you. Because I wanted you to be free to live your life. To be happy. To not be chained to a husband who couldn't even remember your name. These past years have been the loneliest of my life. Every day I think about you. Wonder if you're happy. Hope that you've moved on and found peace. I've worked every job I could get. Construction, warehouses, whatever would pay. I saved everything I could. I barely spent money on food or clothes. I lived in the cheapest places I could find. Because I wanted to leave you something. Some way to take care of you. Even though I couldn't be there to do it myself. I'm not good with words, Margaret. I never have been. But I need you to know you were the best thing that ever happened to me. Our life together, our children, every moment with you was a gift I never deserved. I'm sorry I couldn't be stronger. I'm sorry I couldn't fight this disease and win. I'm sorry I had to leave you. But I'm not sorry I loved you. I could never be sorry for that. In this envelope, you'll find what I've managed to save over the years. It's not nearly enough to make up for the pain I've caused you, but it's all I have to give. Please use it to be happy. Travel, buy a nice house, do all the things we always talked about doing but never got around to. Live, Margaret. Live the life I couldn't give you. I love you. I will always love you. In this life and the next. Forever yours, Robert. I was crying so hard by the end that I could barely see the words on the page. I clutched the letter to my chest and sobbed. You stupid, wonderful, impossible man, I whispered. Why couldn't you just trust me to love you through it? But I knew why. He was trying to protect me. It was what he'd always done. With shaking hands, I reached back into the envelope. There was more inside. I pulled out a bank book. I opened it and stared at the number, not quite comprehending what I was seeing. The account balance was over $12 million. I counted the zeros again. 12 million. How? How had Robert saved this much money? I flipped through the bank book, looking at the deposits. Small amounts over and over again. $500 here, $800 there, sometimes $1,000. Week after week, month after month, year after year. He'd been working constantly, multiple jobs, saving every penny for me. There was more in the envelope. Property deeds. Robert had bought land, small parcels in areas that were scheduled for development. He must have researched, planned, invested wisely, despite his deteriorating mind. I did rough calculations. Between the cash in the bank and the property values, Robert had left me close to $20 million. $20 million saved by a man living in a house that was falling apart, eating cheap food, wearing threadbare clothes, working himself to the bone while his mind slowly disappeared. All for me. I found one more note at the bottom of the envelope, on a small piece of paper. This is about $20 million total. Maybe you can finally live comfortably. You deserve it, Margaret. You always deserved so much more than I could give you. I don't know how long I sat there, surrounded by bank documents and property deeds and that letter, crying until I couldn't breathe. He'd given me everything, literally everything he had, and all I'd wanted was him. Several days later, my doorbell rang. I'd been sitting in the living room, staring at the photographs on the wall, when the sound jolted me out of my thoughts. When I opened the door, Jason and Emily stood on the porch. My heart leaped. Had they come to reconcile? To finally talk about their father? But the looks on their faces told me otherwise. "We heard about the money," Jason said without preamble. My stomach dropped. "How did you—" "Word gets around, Mom. $20 million? And you weren't going to tell us?" Emily stepped forward. "Mom, we're family. Don't we deserve a share? We're his children, after all. There are inheritance laws." "Stop!" I held up my hand. "Just stop." "Mom, be reasonable." "No." My voice came out harder than I'd intended. "You want to talk about being family. Where were you when your father was dying? Where were you when he was alone in that nursing home?" "Mom, we didn't know," Emily started. "I called you. I told you he was sick. I begged you to come see him. And you said he was dead to you. You said he deserved whatever he got." Jason's jaw tightened. "He abandoned us." "He was sick," I shouted. "He had Alzheimer's. He left to protect us, not because he stopped loving us." "So you say," Jason muttered. "But we only have your word for that." "Get out!" "Mom," I said, "get out. Your father spent 15 years working himself to death to leave me that money. He saved every penny while living in poverty. He did it out of love. And you—" I looked at both of them, these children I'd raised, and barely recognized them. "You didn't even come to his funeral. We have our own lives, our own families," Emily protested. "Then go live them, without this money, because you're not getting a cent of it." "You can't do that," Jason said angrily. "We have legal rights. Sue me then." I crossed my arms. "Spend years in court fighting over it. By the time the lawyers are done, there won't be anything left anyway. Is that what you want?" They stared at me, clearly not expecting this reaction. "Your father loved you," I said more quietly. "He left so you wouldn't have to watch him deteriorate. He thought he was protecting you. The least you could do is honor his memory instead of treating him like an ATM." Emily's face reddened. "That's not fair. Life isn't fair. Your father learned that lesson the hard way. Now it's your turn to learn it." I stepped back and started to close the door. "Don't come back here," I said. "Not unless you can come to genuinely talk about your father. To remember him as a person, not a paycheck. Until then, we have nothing to say to each other." I closed the door in their faces. A moment later, I heard their car start and drive away. I slid down against the door and sat on the floor, my head in my hands. I'd just essentially cut off my own children. The thought made me sick. But I couldn't give them that money. Not like this. Not when they were treating their father's sacrifice with such contempt. Maybe someday they'd understand. Maybe someday they'd come back, ready to really talk. Ready to remember Robert as the complicated, flawed, loving man he'd been. But until then, I had to honor what Robert wanted. And he'd wanted me to be taken care of. I pulled myself up and walked back to the living room. I looked at all the photographs on the walls. All those memories. "What should I do with all this money?" I asked Robert's picture aloud. "What would you want me to do?" Of course, there was no answer. But as I sat there, an idea began to form. Over the next few weeks, I threw myself into a project. I used Robert's money to establish a foundation, the Parker Foundation, for Alzheimer's research and family support. Half the money would go to funding research into early-onset Alzheimer's. The other half would provide support services for families caring for loved ones, with dementia counseling, respite care, financial assistance. I hired lawyers and accountants to set it up properly. I wanted it to last, to help people for years to come. This was how I would honor Robert. By taking the money he'd saved for me and using it to help others facing the same nightmare he'd faced. Maybe the research would lead to better treatments. Maybe someday no one would have to make the choice Robert made to abandon their family to protect them from an incurable disease. The foundation launched 6 months after Robert's death. The press coverage was extensive local papers, even some national news. The story of a man who'd sacrificed everything for his wife, even after their divorce, resonated with people. Donations poured in from others who'd been touched by Alzheimer's. The foundation grew beyond anything I'd imagined. And through it all, I stayed in Robert's house. I fixed it up properly, not luxury, but comfortable, safe, warm. But I kept the walls exactly as they were. All the photographs, all the notes. They were Robert's legacy, and I wouldn't erase them. Sometimes I'd sit in the living room and talk to him, like I had in those final weeks. I did it, Robert. I used your gift to help people. I hope that makes you happy. I hope wherever you are, you're proud of me. 1 year after Robert's death, on what would have been our 36th anniversary, I was sitting on the porch, watching the sunset when a car pulled into the driveway. Emily got out. She walked slowly up to the porch, her eyes red like she'd been crying. "Mom," she said softly, "can we talk?" I looked at her for a long moment, then patted the chair beside me. "Sit down, honey." She did, and for a while, we just sat together in silence, watching the sun paint the sky orange and pink. "I saw the news about the foundation," Emily finally said. "What you're doing with Dad's money. I'm not doing it for recognition." "I know. That's what made me realize I was wrong, Mom. About everything." I turned to look at her. Tears were streaming down her face. I was so angry at Dad for so long. I held on to that anger, like it was protecting me somehow. But all it did was make me bitter, make me cruel. She wiped her eyes. He was sick. He was trying to protect us. And I treated his memory like trash. "Oh, Emily." I took her hand. "I'm sorry, Mom. I'm so, so sorry. For how I acted. For what I said. For not being there when you needed me." I pulled her into a hug, and she broke down completely, sobbing into my shoulder. "It's okay," I whispered, stroking her hair. "It's okay, baby. We all process grief differently. There's no right way to do it." "I want to know about him," she said between sobs. "About Dad. The real version, not the one I made up in my head to justify being angry. Will you tell me?" "Of course." We spent the rest of the evening on that porch. I told her everything. About Robert's diagnosis. About his decision to leave. About the years he spent alone, working to save money for us. About his final days. And how he'd never stopped loving any of us. Emily cried through most of it. When I was done, she was quiet for a long time. "He really did it all because he loved us?" she asked. "He really did. I wish I could tell him I understand now. That I forgive him. That I love him too. I think he knows, honey. Somehow I think he knows." Jason came to visit a few weeks later. His apology was shorter, more awkward. He'd never been good with emotions. But it was sincere. "I was an idiot," he said simply. "I'm sorry, Mom." And that was enough. Both my children started volunteering with the foundation. Emily helped with fundraising events. Jason, who worked in finance, helped manage the foundation's investments to make the money last. We were healing, slowly, painfully, but we were healing.